I, Xuan Tong Liu, also known as Amor, the descendant of the dragon tribe, acknowledging and paying my respect to the traditional custodians of the land and waterways on which I have laughed, cried, contemplated, grown since March 2020, the Gombangi people of the Gombangi Nation. I honor this land where my daughter Maitreya was conceived and birthed on the 1st of January 2021, and now in the process of birthing this research project. It would not be made possible without their precedence and wisdom. I am forever grateful, and will always be. I aspire to deep listen, hold space, and reconnect with the spirits. I pay my reverence to the elders past, present, and emerging. Having spent the first 2/3 of my life in China and arriving in Australia for the first time in 2012, I had little to no knowledge of the indigenous peoples and cultures of this land until I deliberately chose Indigenous study as the focus of my master's degree in 2019. I still remember clear as day that powerful lecture we had with an Indigenous educator. I will never forget the moment the silence prevailed when he asked the cohort the meaning behind Aboriginal names of different places in Melbourne. When he said how Elizabeth Street in Melbourne CBD used to get flooded seasonally and the Federation Square was the meeting place. Those questions are supposed to be common senses, but it was never brought to our awareness. Few people in the course at the time didn't see the value and importance of Indigenous perspectives in the world, still considered boring and outdated. I deeply feel in my being that this needs to be changed. Though connecting to the Indigenous perspectives has been incredibly healing, this research pathway has also been incredibly emotional and eye-opening. What I have learned has been shocking and thought-provoking. To say that the Australian landscape is a massive crime scene is not an understatement. As Western epistemology and ontology continue to be the dominant framework and narrative for Australian society, true inclusive education will not happen if the underlying system is created and maintained to serve white people. As our societal notion of intelligence remains deeply rooted in the Western epistemological idea of academic work, schools have been predominantly focusing on advancing cognitive intelligence. I observed that even more so for my own schooling experience in China, where the education system perhaps has taken it to an extreme. My childhood's lack of creativity, playfulness, and soulfulness has made me realize how important it is to connect to my body and place. As children in the public schooling system are taught from a young age to disconnect from themselves and nature, the result of such a cognitive biased education system is devastating. In the less than 300 years of Industrial Revolution, humankind has almost exhausted the planet, particularly with where the world is going with COVID-19. Indigenous perspectives have never played a more pivotal role in determining the future of humanity, offering a holistic and sustainable outlook on humanity's relationship with nature. It helps restore the balance in current society. However, such perspectives are often completely dismissed, if not, then tokenistically represented in primary education setting. Whereas the art, as the creative expression of the soul of a culture, is the core of Aboriginal life. It can be used as a highly effective tool to teach Indigenous perspectives. As the life of Indigenous peoples are inextricably immersed with all forms of arts, such as storytelling, singing, dancing, and painting. Therefore, it makes me wonder, how can we use the arts to teach Indigenous perspectives across disciplines? Simultaneously, I will also explore the following questions to help me unfold the core question raised above and to help me develop a better understanding of this topic. How can Indigenous education integrated through the arts help foster students' intellectual, emotional, and spiritual learning? My literature review is only limited to the scope of this capstone project, so it's not completely exhaustive. I found the lack of literature on teaching Indigenous perspectives through the arts. Although Okara highlights the importance of using the arts to teach Indigenous cultures and histories, I found even fewer literature relevant to Australia's context. The arts are at the core of Aboriginal life, for it is inherently connected to the spiritual realm, the expression of individual and group identity, and the relationship between people and the land. So I researched Indigenous pedagogies and arts integration individually for synthesis in this literature review to fill the gap. So I summarized studies. In reviewing literature regarding teaching IP across disciplines, Bishop et al.'s Cultural Community and Curriculum project emphasizes the importance of authentic collaboration with the Indigenous communities in schools. While culturally responsive pedagogies are being widely adapted in Australian schools, Harrison and Scribleva criticize its framework being essentially Eurocentric. That is to assimilate students of minority into the dominant curriculum, as they found the notion of country is intrinsically pedagogical. They emphasize the need to prioritize both Indigenous and Western epistemologies in Australian curriculum by thinking beyond cultural assimilation and students' cultural backgrounds. And in reviewing literature relating to the arts integration, Friedman explains the arts integration as transformative pedagogy helps students restore their connections between the physical, cognitive, experiential, cultural, emotional, and contextual realms. Oliver et al.'s research explores the idea of applying multimodal art to access embodied knowing and sensory awareness for transformative arts integration. Their research combined mindfulness and embodiment with various art mediums, which is similar to what Karuna and Karuna have described as Aboriginal life. In reviewing literature that overlaps these two realms, teaching IP through arts integration, Bickert illustrates the power of cultural-based arts education combining meaningful and immersive arts integration in teaching IP. In his article publishing the outcomes of Project Intersect, 50 American non-Indigenous educators participated in cultural competency training. They worked collaboratively and respectively with local Indigenous elders, scholars, and artists. Concurrently, each teacher applied what they have learned in their class. He observed that teachers who truly understood the importance and potential of IP as a result of the project started implementing cultural-based arts integration across disciplines. Furthermore, the author believes that using Indigenous knowledge and arts as a portal to facilitate students to think about race, power, and injustice is a more approachable, tangible, and creative way to have conversations about these uncomfortable and sensitive but important topics. In the context of Australia, Green et al. Discussed that art is a powerful vehicle for leadership in reimagining decolonized Australia, as it challenges people to examine the current status quo and assumed certainty in society where colonialism has never ended. Aboriginal ontology, contrary to its Western counterpart, is heart-based, intuitive, and timeless. Similarly, art has the power to bring people back to their heart and intuition. It also enables the artist to tap into a timeless flow state. Learning IP through the arts is more than just a cognitive process. Therefore, I decided to use the arts-based research method as the main research methodology, with the developmental portfolio self-study method as its container. DPSS was chosen as an introspective platform for me to store, organize, and study my professional progression. ABR gives space for subjective and artistic experiences to emerge naturally. Furthermore, personal history and memory work methods encourage me to reflect on and deconstruct my identity through self-inquiry. Through the combination of these four methods, I intend to create a transformative space to disrupt normative practices for self-reflection and critical analysis through exploring liminal realms. Since I did not encounter any literature using ABR during the review, I hope this paper can fill the gap and provide a different perspective by using such approach. Throughout 2 semesters of data collection, I delved deep into my cognitive, emotional, and spiritual self. During the process, I created artistic pieces such as poems. Upon reflecting on its creating process and outcome, I was provided with opportunities to truly understand and integrate Indigenous ontology into my teaching practices. Through recognizing, interacting, and questioning my own stories, I gained further understanding towards my motives and positionality behind my research question. The data are explored through different artistic avenues, which has encouraged me to examine the in-between space within myself, which otherwise cannot be obtained. Specifically, in 3 of the tasks that I created for using artists as a starting point to teach Indigenous perspectives, I researched the bird gala as they flock around where I live at sunset, and accordingly created a watercolor painting to depict their movement. In the second activity, I simply used black lines upon impression from the artist's style to depict the country I live in. The last activity allowed me to investigate the hidden Australian history, the British nuclear testing that occurred in South Australia in the 50s and 60s. I presented my findings in the form of infographics. Through following my own experience as a teacher to construct 3 meaningful and contextual lessons, and as a student to complete the tasks generated, I gained first-hand experience on both sides to inform and improve my future teaching practice. Furthermore, it enabled me to become an artographer to analyze the data generated from this experience. Aligning with communicative actions principle, the collected data is analyzed in artography and poetic inquiry. The methods chosen are intended to help me gain further insights and generate new connections which I might have overlooked before. Through analyzing the data in 3 distinct but interconnected roles as artist, researcher, and teacher, I enter into a third space where these identities can dance and communicate with each other. This is hoping to stimulate the relationality in Aboriginal ontology, where identities are interrelated and interacted. Poetic inquiry helps explore my voice and emotions in an increasingly empathetic, neutral, and careful manner. Much like Aboriginal ontology, poetry is based on lived experiences, which can provide different perspectives into the same scenario. Combining with artographic practices, the data is therefore analyzed purposefully and the findings are presented poetically. As an artist, I'm grateful for my capstone journey. It has held a reflective space for me to explore the creative, artistic, and inner aspects of myself, which I had not been able to previously in any other academic work I have undertaken. The whole process not only interweaved the designated curriculum, such as history and science, and IP with integrity, but also enabled me to learn and explore with my different senses beyond cognitivity. I was engrossed in the process of learning as I was able to express my learning through arts in whatever form I felt comfortable with. I tapped into the experience of flow, depicted by Csikszentmihalyi, where deeper layers of emotions as well as complex thought processes can be freely explored. In investigating the physical and non-physical phenomena through the arts, I was empowered to gain trans-subjective ways of knowing and to access multi-intelligence. As Marshall asserts, art integration gives us the potential to transform our understandings in academic disciplines and of art. In a big picture, it can catalyze a transformation in teaching and learning across the curriculum. As a researcher, my first research experience with ABR has almost felt like a warm and heartfelt breeze compared to other research methods in academia. It shows me that research can be intimate, personal, and intangible. Some might consider ABR unreliable or informal, though Dr. Patricia Levy argues that it enables researchers to reach a broader audience, not just the scholars within the community, but more importantly, to have it accessible to the general public, so it can fulfill the purpose of conducting research, which is to contribute knowledge to the wider world. Moreover, I cannot help but feel there is a stigma to talk about anything tangible in the academic world, as if using words such as spirit, soul, or feeling will make someone's words invalid. A First Nation Canadian researcher has expressed her feelings of inadequacy when employing Indigenous research methodology, as she felt a continuous pressure to fit in the Western research framework that is deemed to be acceptable. This reminds me of a joke Sir Ken Robinson made when he commented on the Western academia. If you want real evidence of out-of-body experiences, get yourself along to a residential conference of senior academics and pop into the discotheque on the final night. Perhaps it's time for us to consider ourselves more than just cognitive beings and start recognizing the soul that is inside of us, for it will bring back the humanness within us. As a teacher, I realized how teaching should be an effortless process, as it is ultimately the interchange of constant giving and receiving. in a conventional classroom, teaching is represented as a linear, arduous, and single-directioned process, although it should be quite opposite. Teaching should be reciprocal, dynamic, and circular, which is aligned with Indigenous ontology, where spirituality is a significant part of their identity. It is an indispensable and integral part of their whole being. For each child to grow holistically, teachers need to be whole themselves. As described by Dotzel, it is fundamental for a whole teacher to be aware of perspectives including the intellectual, emotional, physical, social, aesthetic, and spiritual. Particularly, normalizing spirituality within education can cultivate a healthy dynamic that nourishes spiritual intelligence in the classroom, which helps reconnect students to their heart wisdom, whereas Western epistemology has been silencing spirituality within classrooms and beyond. It is dangerous to polarize the mind from the heart, as it perpetuates the separation between ourselves and all things, which has led to a lack of compassion for each other and cognitive states of heartlessness. I cannot help but feel the dilemma we are facing nowadays as a collective is the direct result of the lack of spirituality in our current education system. As a teacher, I feel we urgently need to integrate this missing piece in school for harmonizing humanity in our society in the future. In conducting this self-study research, I was shown the potential of how a teacher can authentically teach IP in everyday classroom while achieving curricular goals through the arts. I learned that it is not as difficult as most teachers think. It requires no artistic skills nor advanced indigenous knowledge, but a humble mind and an open heart. Hence, as an art specialist, I aspire to teach IP with arts as much as possible in my future lessons. Furthermore, I aspire to be more conscious of whether I am in service of the whole growth of my students in each lesson throughout the process. Last but not least, I aspire to learn from and collaborate with the local Aboriginal communities, for they have an important role in our society and their voices need to be heard. Considering the Australian and the Victorian curriculum have recognized it as a cross-curriculum priority, there is still a lack of peer-reviewed research investigating the implementation of IP in education. Scholarly papers that openly discuss the importance of heart wisdom, soul, or spirituality in education are even more scarce. This is somehow understandable since the Western epistemology only accepts tangible and empirical evidence. Though some researchers such as Samadhi are reluctant to recognize spirituality as a form of intelligence, they still consider it being plausible. Therefore, there is a need for future research in this arena. This made me realize the fundamental problem with the current education system is its lack of connection to the heart and soul. This has been echoed quite loudly within the education profession by many scholarly educators over decades, including Dewey, who wrote Soul and Body over 100 years ago. This self-study research has paved the way for my future research, which I would like to inquire on how and why teachers should bring spirituality back to the classrooms. The urgency and importance of normalizing spirituality within primary educational settings has been unprecedented, especially considering the chaos and conflicts we have been facing as a collective nowadays. A sense of expansion has filled my whole being after learning about the possibilities of how I, as an educator, can embed IP authentically and seamlessly across disciplines through the arts. Reflecting back on my experiences with IP before, I never truly related to it, apart from conceptualizing it. Exploring this question has allowed me to understand Indigenous ways of being and knowing in an embodied way. Through teaching students IP with art, we can role model the relationships we strive to see across society in a more accessible, friendly, or sensory way. A truly integrative society where Indigenous communities have a crucial place in the education system, where the collaborative effort is not tokenistic. In fact, the perpetuation of harmful practices that have been the dominant force in Australian schools need to be radically stopped and changed. We as educators need to contemplate on why we teach what we teach and understand the importance of teaching IP even in a classroom that has no Indigenous students. A paradigm shift in our classroom that balances both Indigenous and Western ways of being and knowing needs to happen. Extrapolating from this, I believe that all teachers have the moral and ethical responsibility to incorporate IP in their everyday lessons. For that is what true reconciliation looks like.